Good afternoon, good morning, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining Aegon's first virtual roundtable to discuss the findings from our annual retirement readiness report, the new social contract, age-friendly employers, exploring the evolving nature of the employer-employee relationship and examining the vital role employers play in helping their employees achieve a financially secure retirement. My name is Mike Mansfield, and I'm the Program Director for the Aegon Center for Longevity and Retirement. Today, I'll be joined by an impressive range of speakers from across the industry who will be introduced by our moderator later. Mark Twigg, Executive Director of Cicero AMO, will moderate our discussion today. You may know Mark from his successful lobbying that brought about change in the UK and EU legislation on issues such as gender equality in pensions and access to workplace savings. This session will be on the record and the discussion will be recorded for internal and external purposes. Please note that your lines will be muted throughout the presentation, but we will open the floor for questions at the end of the discussion. Please submit any questions you have throughout the call in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We hope to have a lively Q&A session in the last 10 minutes of the event. To kick things off, I wanted to provide a brief overview of the report and our research. Since 2012, Aegon has carried out one of the largest global retirement surveys of its kind. Conducted in cooperation with nonprofits Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies and Instituto de Longevidade Mongeral Aegon, the survey spans 15 countries and 16,000 employed and retired respondents, as we look to create a blueprint for retirement which remains affordable and sustainable. This year's report delves into topics on the offering of employee benefits, including retirement and other health and welfare benefits, as well as creating an age-friendly culture in which employees of all ages have the ability to succeed. Increases in longevity mean that people are living longer today than they have at any point in history. This gift of extra time provides us with an opportunity to do the things that are important to us, but also requires us to rethink the way we work, plan for, and live in retirement. The world of work has been changing over recent decades, and the pace of change has accelerated due to the current COVID-19 pandemic. Our relationship with work is changing, and for many, employment arrangements are becoming more flexible. In fact, 58% of the workers in our survey are telling us that the concept of a job for life is a thing of the past. Changes in the way we are working can also be seen in the fact that the majority of workers no longer see retirement as a cliff edge event, rather as a phased transition where they will continue to work in some capacity. People envision working in retirement for a combination of reasons, staying active and alert, as well as financial reasons. There is a clear need for us to embrace age-friendly workplaces where people can stay economically active and retire at a time that is suitable for them. And that is why it is disappointing to see that 33% of workers feel that their employer is not doing anything to facilitate a multi-generational workplace, one where older workers can work longer and phase into retirement, and younger workers have more flexibility to balance life priorities like parenting and caregiving responsibilities. Preparing for a retirement that can last 20 years or longer requires a holistic approach that includes sound financial planning, a focus on maintaining good health and keeping skills up to date. The workplace provides an ideal environment for workers to save for retirement. People often have a long-term relationship with their employer where they receive a salary and other benefits. These two elements can be the keys to success. Employers can help create an environment where saving for retirement becomes habitual and workers are nudged into making choices that will help set them up for a financial security over the longer term. Encouraging news is that over half of the workers in our survey said that they are offered a retirement plan by their employer. These plans create the opportunity for workers to save, and by opening them up to all employees and making them portable when people move jobs, employers can make sure that saving for retirement becomes the norm. In fact, 41% of the workers in our survey stated that saving for retirement due to employment-related reasons got them started, almost as many as those who started saving for lifetime reasons. Behavioral nudges, like automatically enrolling employees in workplace saving plans, have proven success, with 65% of workers globally finding this appealing. For example, in the United Kingdom, auto-enrollment was introduced as compulsory for employers in 2012, and the latest figures from the Department of Work and Pensions show that overall 88% of eligible employees are participating in a workplace pension. Another area where employers can make a difference in the retirement preparations of their employees is in offering advice and support. Globally, the retirement income that workers expect to need to live on equates to 67% of their current income. Yet, only a quarter feel that they are on course to achieve this income in retirement. This disparity clearly lays out the difficulty many workers are facing to adequately save for their retirement. The survey finds that 62% of employees who receive financial advice as an employee benefit say that they have a well-developed retirement plan. Employers also play a significant role in designing workplace environments that help to stimulate both greater savings and healthier lifestyle choices, as well as increasing awareness among workers about the connection between the two. The workplace is a natural starting point in any discussion linking health, wealth, and long-term well-being. Employers can provide an environment that supports making healthier choices easier and matches the flexibility workers are looking for to enable them to take better care of their health. The survey asked workers which workplace wellness programs they would be interested in if they were offered by their employer. And even small steps taken by employers, such as providing healthy food and snack options at the office, are found to be appealing by more than 1 in 3 workers. Exercise programs comprising on-site or discounts for local gyms find a similar level of appeal, also at 35%. Continual learning and development throughout life is key to maintaining employability in the workplace. Lifelong learning and maintaining up-to-date skills enable individuals to work longer and to increase the possibility of phased retirement. In turn, remaining economically active for longer allows individuals to continue to save habitually and accumulate more for retirement. In an increasingly fast-paced and uncertain job market, many employers may not be able to guarantee employment for life, but they can provide employees with the skills they need to succeed and maintain employable. It is disappointing to see that just over 1 in 4 workers say that they do not receive any training to keep their skills up to date. To close the loop and create a bridge to our panel discussion, the last point that I'd like to make is to make a call for employers to do more to allow older workers phase into retirement. This can be a win-win both for employers and employees. It is evident that employers can be doing more in this area. Less than 1 in 3 workers state that they have the option to move from full-time to part-time work to help them phase into retirement. And with that last finding, I'd like to hand it over to Mark Twigg now to start our panel discussion. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mike, for that introduction and the excellent summary of the findings for the 2020 Retirement Readiness Survey. I think it certainly gives us lots of food for thought for today's panel discussion, and it's my job to take us through the next 40 minutes of that discussion. And to begin with, I'd like to firstly introduce our panel of experts who are joining us from the US and Brazil today. If I could start by introducing Debra Whitman, Executive Vice President and Chief Public Policy Officer at the AARP, which is the American Association of Retired Persons. It's the largest non-profit organization in the States, seeking to promote the empowerment of over 50s. Debra's been doing a lot of work around living, learning and earning longer, which is one of the case studies in this year's report, which I'd recommend you all have a look at on page 32. Second, I'd like to introduce Professor Luiz Roberto Cunha, who is an economist by profession and is the Professor and Dean of the Social Sciences Center at the Catholic University in Rio de Janeiro. And as well as a distinguished career in academia, he's also worked in the private sector, which includes his current role with Aegon Center. And he'll be talking about some of the aspects of retirement reforms in Brazil and the role of government. Finally, it's a pleasure to introduce an old friend, Catherine Collinson, who I've worked with for 10 years as part of this project. She is the CEO and president of the Transamerica Institute and the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies. And as well as that, she's also been heavily involved in creating the Aegon Institutes in Brazil and the Netherlands. And I think, Catherine, you've probably been doing retirement research for 25, 30 years. So in every sense of the word, she is a thought leader, and I'm delighted to have all three of our panelists with us today. Now, as Mike mentioned, the theme which drives Aegon's work around retirement readiness all builds up to this notion of the need for a new social contract. And this year's survey is looking at that concept of the age-friendly workplace and what does that mean in a practical sense. So if I could ask by starting all of our panelists to give us a few sentences on what you think age-friendly workplaces mean and why it's so important that we achieve that. And if I could just start by perhaps asking Debra to kick us off.
Thanks, Mark. I think it's important when we say age-friendly that we really think in all age-friendly. So it's not just being friendly with people with higher ages, but it's actually really looking at the diversity of your employees and their needs and making sure that regardless of age or stage or tenure within an organization, that you're actually addressing the needs of the broader population. Let me give an example. I think a lot of employers and most countries other than the US have realized that women have kids and give maternity leave. But it's important to also think that many people are caregivers throughout their life of older adults, parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. And so thinking more broadly about the care needs of workers within a multi-inclusive environment, I think is really, really key.
Thank you for that. If I could now ask Professor Luiz to give his comments.
Mark, thank you very much. Before talking about the specific sentence that we discussed with Instituto Mongeral Longevidade, Aegon Longevidade, I would like to say a few words about the specifics of Brazil, as I will be talking about the role of government. In Brazil, Social Security has been, for many years, a very important scheme of government. But as I'm talking with people in Europe and United States, I think I should say that for us, Social Security was some form of inverted welfare state. Europe, most of the countries have a welfare state. In our case, we could say that this was inverted one, because our country is one of the world's worst, as one of the worst income distribution. But a sizable part of population, public servants, workers in state companies, and in big companies, multinationals or even Brazilian companies, had the retirement guaranteed by pension funds, and the low income formal workers had the basic retirement provided by their own employers' contributions, but also their contributions. But a significant part of the population had no formal work in Brazil and still has no formal work. And so, I'd like to say that when we are discussing a little bit about Brazil, when we will talk about the government role, I'll say that we have a form of inverted welfare state. So I think this is important to say, as you introduce me as someone that will talk a little bit about the characteristics of Brazil, which are very different from the other partners in this research. But going to the importance of this classic research, I would say that age-friendly employers are the ones who understand now the huge advantage of having a multidimensional diversity in the working force, and will be the ones who shape the future of work. I think this is what we discuss it at Instituto Longevidade Mundial to be maybe the main focus point of this fantastic and very important research. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. And Catherine, you've drawn the short straw, going last. What would you say to add to those perspectives?
Well, in our work, we like to define an age-friendly employer as an employer that embodies inclusivity, diversity, and a multi-generational workforce. Age-friendly employers cultivate a culture in which every employee, workers of all ages, have the opportunity to contribute, learn, grow, and succeed.
Thank you, Catherine. Now, they're great introductory thoughts in setting out what it is we're going to be talking about today and why that's so important. I think the key question then is, how do we make that a reality? And if we could start with maybe looking at the perspective of the individual workers themselves, what will it actually take to get those people to take responsibility for themselves to a greater extent? I think it's probably sensible to carry on talking to Catherine for a second, because this has been a key area of the work that we've been doing for the last 10 years. So thinking in terms of the changes that are taking place, the fact that people are living longer, what do we need to do to reimagine the way people live, work and retire in order to make this a reality?
Well, Mark, thank you for asking that question. If there was ever a time in our history to reimagine how we live, work, and retire, that time is now. And one of the points I would like to reiterate that Luiz Roberto made is about the sustainability of retirement systems around the world. We heard about Brazil, but we also see in our research that in countries around the world, retirement systems are undergoing strain. In many countries, government benefits like Social Security are facing funding issues and need reforms, in large part due to increases in longevity and population aging. We've also seen the trend that employer-sponsored defined benefit plans have been replaced with employer-sponsored, yet employee-funded defined contribution plans, often with a contribution from the employer. And what the end result is, individuals are now increasingly expected to self-fund a greater portion of the retirement income. However, relatively few are fully equipped to do so. And Mike made a really important point in his introduction. Only 25% of workers in our survey said they feel they're on course to meet their estimated retirement income needs. So the role of the individual has grown, and one of the most important things that we can do is help prepare individuals to take on this responsibility.
Now, you mentioned that point around the shift from final salary DB pensions to DC pensions, and there's often been this sense that DC is less generous, that the contribution levels are lower, that the retirement incomes will be lower, and you mentioned we need to prepare people for that. We need to get them to understand what a realistic level of contribution should look like. Do you have any thoughts on how we undertake that?
Of course, and it's also important to just remind everyone, part of the transition from DB to DC plans, defined benefit to defined contribution plans, is a result of changing workforce trends. As Mike had mentioned, 58% of workers agree with the idea that a job for life is a thing of the past. And through defined contribution plans, workers and employees can be saving for retirement, contributing, and on an ongoing basis throughout their careers. To your question, what can employers do? Well, to begin with, first of all, only 52% of workers in the survey say they're offered a retirement plan by their employers. So that is a really important starting point for employers. And as part of those plans, employers can offer investment guidance, planning services, and financial wellness resources. This type of access to these services, education, resources, advice can tremendously help workers get on the path towards a secure retirement.
Now, you've talked in previous reports about the 5 fundamentals of retirement planning, retirement systems. Can you talk a little bit in detail about what they are?
Our project team with the survey over the last couple of years has seen a holistic approach to planning emerge that we now call the 5 fundamentals of retirement readiness. And I'll briefly explain what each of these 5 fundamentals are. The first fundamental is to save early and habitually. Research has shown over the years starting to save as early as possible and consistently as possible is what can help people save and grow their savings over the course of a career that can last decades and prepare them for retirement. However, only 40% of our survey respondents are habitual savers. So saving habitually is the first fundamental to retirement readiness. The second fundamental is having a retirement strategy. Only 17% of workers in the survey say they have a written plan for the retirement. The third fundamental is have a backup plan for life's unforeseen circumstances. In our research and the research of others, all too often we see that people are retiring sooner than they had planned for reasons that could relate to health issues, family health issues, or job loss, and many don't have a backup plan. In fact, the survey finds only 35% of workers have a backup plan if they're unable to work before their planned retirement. The fourth fundamental of retirement readiness is adopt a healthy lifestyle. With people having the potential to live longer than any other time in history, that gift of longevity is not an entitlement. We've got to take care of ourselves so that we can fully enjoy life in good health and be able to work as long as we want or need to. We asked our survey respondents what basic steps that they're taking to maintain a healthy lifestyle, and we found that many are not doing as much as they can do. And these things relate to eating right, eating healthfully, exercising regularly, getting plenty of rest, and seeking medical attention as needed. So if we're going to live long, healthy, and financially secure lives, we've got to safeguard our health. And the fifth and final fundamental for retirement readiness is embracing lifelong learning. And embracing lifelong learning can help us in so many ways as we think about our working lives, our careers, which can now last 40 or more years. We've got to keep our job skills up to date. We've got to continue learning and growing and ensure that our skill sets are relevant to meet the needs of employers and the marketplace. So committing to lifelong learning is essential. We also saw a compelling finding in the survey results related to learning, and that is many workers have the opportunity to improve their financial literacy, which can help improve their retirement planning. We asked the survey respondents the big 3 financial literacy questions formulated by leading experts, Drs. Anna Maria Lusardi and Olivia Mitchell, which test knowledge about things like compounding interest, inflation, and risk diversification. Only 28% of workers globally could answer all 3 questions correctly. So Mark, thank you for asking. Those are the 5 fundamentals in a nutshell.
Thank you, Catherine. Now, listening to you, it's very clear that those 5 fundamentals within the context of a new social contract, individuals can't do all of those things on their own. They're going to need help. And there's clearly an enabling role for the employer in making that happen. So I'd like to bring Debra in at this point, if I could, to think a little bit more about what that employer role looks like. You know, in a world where the relationship between the employer and the employee is dramatically shifting, particularly with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, what do you think employers can do to make that a reality, particularly given that inclusive workforces and inclusive retirement systems are a critical element of this? and the need for intergenerational inclusion. What are your thoughts on that, and what are the insights from the work that you've been undertaking?
Thank you, Mark. And I really do want to thank Mike and Catherine and the entire team for putting this survey together. It's really unique to have this data from so many countries, and the topic this year couldn't be more relevant. I think we're at a new point in human history with the aging of society, where we can have up to 5 generations all working together in the workplace. That may be a young intern and somebody that, like Luiz, who's been working for his full life. But we haven't seen the workplace necessarily adapt into understanding how to take advantage of a multi-generational workforce. And let me be clear, if it is imperative that we use all of the human capital that we have, not just for a business, but actually for economies as a whole. We've had a study come out of the OECD that looked at what GDP growth could be across the OECD just if people worked at the highest level of any of the countries, which I think is New Zealand. And over the next 30 years, GDP would be 19% higher if we allowed the people to work who wanted to. And I think that shows us, particularly in a time of economic downturn, that using all of the talent and resources is never more expensive. So why should employers care about a multi-generational workforce? Well, first of all, we know that multi-generational teams perform better. We get new ideas, we get a mix of experience. Second of all, we know that multi-generational teams have a better sense of the marketplace. If you have people who represent all segments of your market working for you, then you're going to meet that market even better. We've done a study on the longevity economy, so looking at what consumers in the United States over age 50 would be able to produce if they were their own country. And it's $8.3 billion of economic activity. And if we added on to that, $8.3 trillion. I forgot a couple zeros. If we added on to that all of the contributions that they provide that aren't paid, like caregiving and volunteering, it would equal $9 trillion of economic activity. So you have this $9 trillion marketplace. If you don't have employees that represent that marketplace, you're not going to be as well able to serve it. It also provides a stronger pipeline of talent to have a multi-generational team where you have people that are learning and growing in their careers. And more importantly, workers like it. 7 in 10 workers like to be part of a multi-generational team. So I was disappointed to see Mike's results that only 33% of employees see their employer providing support for a multi-generational workforce, because a survey we did said 86% of corporate executives that we surveyed were interested in this issue. So let me talk about what they can do if they are interested. One that I mentioned early on is look to make sure the benefits that you offer are affecting all of your employees and meet the unique needs across the lifespan. Mike mentioned lifelong earning, as did Catherine, lifelong learning, as did Catherine. Think about things like age-blind hiring. Oftentimes when people put their graduation dates, that can be used to discriminate against them. And let me be honest, discrimination against older people is real. And employers need to be thinking about this as a key part of the multi-generational workforce. In the United States, 61% of people over age 45, which isn't that old, have either experienced or seen age discrimination in their workplace. So we're losing a lot of talent and we're losing a lot of productivity. A study that we did said that GDP in the US would be 4% higher today if people didn't face age discrimination that limited their ability to get a job, made them unemployed longer, or made them feel stuck in the work that they have. And the last thing they can do, and if you could put up the slide with the link, AARP, the World Economic Forum, and the OECD have united on a project called Living, Learning, and Earning Longer. This is a project that we've been doing for about a year. We've been engaging with employers across the globe. We have about 30 companies that have signed on and 11 knowledge partners. And we have webinars that talk about best practices for a multi-generational workforce. We've also done study tours to understand regional differences. So we've been to Singapore and to Paris and here in New York with financial services, talking about their interest as well as their great ideas around these areas. We encourage people to sign up. The address, which I don't know if they're flashing, is aarpinternational.org/LLEL. And we'd be happy to have you. And the best part about this learning collaborative is that it's free. People that are interested in learning more on these issues, particularly employers, can engage with us. We'll be putting together a learning platform at the end with all kinds of great ideas and many of the things that Catherine and Mike have been talking about.
Thank you for that. I guess one of the key questions is, how do we speed up the rate of progress in making this happen? Mike mentioned the example of the UK with automatic enrolment, which was introduced 8 years ago, and 88% of workers, eligible workers, are enrolled in that. Obviously, in America, you have automatic enrolment, but it's not mandatory. Do you think that would be an essential part of the design of pension systems? Does there need to be a little bit more stick in order to make this move quicker?
Well, I think there's roles for individual, I think there's roles for employer, and I think there's roles for the government. In the United States, half of all workers work for an employer that doesn't offer a retirement-based savings plan. And because it's voluntary for employers, it's really hard for the individual to do the right thing and put the money aside every month. That's one of the reasons why we at AARP have been working state by state to pass bills that will have the state serve as a collector of retirement savings for those employees and in businesses that do not offer. I think the features like auto enrollment, and I should say we've passed 13 different states have now started these plans. We just had Colorado passed last week, but it's big states like Oregon, Illinois, California, Washington, my state of Maryland. So this is becoming a realization by at least state governments that there is a role to play to fill in to help workers who want to save but don't have that easy opportunity. Again, we think the employer-based system is important. Unfortunately, with the current rules, employers can't match into these state plans. We think that the employer match is a useful thing to help people build in additional savings as well.
Thank you for those comments. It seems like a good time to segue into the role of the government more generally, and what can governments do? And I'd like to maybe put this question to Luiz Roberto. With government systems under strain as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, what do you see as the role of government in orchestrating a sustainable retirement system? I think Luiz may be on mute.
Sorry, Mark. Thank you for this question. I think I can give some important insights with the Brazilian situation. But first, I'd like to say that it's a pleasure to work with you all. Debra has mentioned that I am an example of multi-generation. I'm 74 years old, and I'm more than 50 years at university working. Catherine is such an expert, and this research is so important. So it's been a pleasure to be a little bit again an example of what we are discussing here and what is the importance of that. Concerning your question, I think that even before COVID-19 pandemic, governments systems were under strain in emerging and developing countries in relation to providing protection nets for the citizens. The crisis, the pandemic crisis, gives more emphasis to the importance of a health attack, the health problems that we have, not only in Brazil, but around all the world. Now, reinforce government's, sorry, reinforce government's role. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Reinforce government rules to build solid systems of protection. Notwithstanding, responsible nations are facing a common phenomenon of our time: the growing role of individuals building a solid foundation for the future, especially when it comes to savings in the long run. And this is one of the very important points, because as we're seeing, this is the main point now, to be able to have a system, a complementary system to your retirement. As a result, government are stepping back, and that's especially what happens in Brazil, on the standard generous benefit programs. As I mentioned in the beginning, we had such a extended benefits programs just for a few part of the population, not for the whole population. I'll give some examples of the problems in Brazil. Brazil is a good example. Before, we just had approved reform on the pensions reform, and this reform has reduced the very, very generous systems that we have. But just to give you some data, in Brazil spends almost 12% of GDP to 8% of its population, which is people with more than 60 years. We are a point out of the curve. As we are aging, our population pyramid has been changing with aging of people. What will happen in the future was that we are going to spend more and more percent of GDP for a lot of more people, and that's not fiscal feasible. So we had this change in this reform, and this reform have reduced a lot of benefits, not only to civil servants, but also to all the other parts of the population, even for the private citizens, and even for those who had those defined benefits on pension plans. A sizable majority of workers in Brazil face no significant financial loss in the replacement of working salary with government retirement benefits. As I said, in Brazil, someone in the government received the same benefit when they are retired that they received the same salary. So this had to be changed. And the government must safeguard standard treatment for all citizens and guarantee that people in need have proper assistance. There is a current discussion in Brazil, and this is very important now with COVID-19, that the government has started to give a little bit more than $100 a month to a huge part of the population. There are more than 80 million people that didn't receive any type of benefits or receive a very small benefits, but not, and they are not on the formal market. And now this is being discussed to be extended as a general basic income for those people. So there are a lot of things that have to be done. And I think this helps a little bit more to show, in your question, what's the government role, even in a country where you have fiscal problems. You have to, this is very important to be decided. Also, when it comes to provide retirement security, government must provide broad incentives to society, so that not only big companies, but also small and middle companies and individuals and economic agents have knowledge. And I think the research shows us that, and in Brazil, the percentage is, I think, is a little bit smaller of people who know how to prepare for the retirement. So I think this is a very important point. And as the government has a role, in our case, it has to diminish its role as being a provider of unjust, unequal funds, and be more a provider of giving incentives to help that people will look for the way of having pensions and retirement.
Now, one of the things that we've looked at throughout the 10 years in this survey is the role of the government in sending signals to people, signaling what kind of behaviours individuals and employers should undertake. Now, there's couple of points on this I'd be quite keen to discuss in a little bit more detail. Firstly, given that we have had the COVID-19 outbreak and a lot of governments have introduced bailouts for individual households and for companies, do you think that sends a signal to people that in future they won't have to make preparations for themselves, that they can rely on the government to a greater extent than they actually can?
Well, this is a classic example of moral hazard in economics, which defines that individuals have incentives to change their behavior when the risk is, or bad decision making is borne to others. So in Brazil, this was very, very clear. The government would give for the low-income people some retirement funds, very low, and the high-income people, the ones who work for government, have a lot of protection. So at the moment, we have to change that. This is being changed by the pension reform. We're passing through a moment that you have to have a bridge to a new working society, working pension society. And at the moment, we have to help the poor people. We are not providing, well, the public servants and others have their income, but we are not providing free income like in other countries you have for people who had lost the capacity to work. So one of the last years, people saw that and started to understand the fiscal fragilities and become in contact with sustainable challenge when it comes to expectations about government actions that can protect economy. So it seems that in Brazil, we started to understand that, and we started to be prepared to that. In Brazil, as a result of the long 3-year publication discussions regarding the need of the public pension reforms, we had 3 years of discussion. I understand that people are more aware of the risk of not having the government to bail out them out. So now this was a very difficult decision in Brazil. There was a discussion. The 3 years when on this last law was being discussed in Congress and by society, but we have been discussing that for many, many more years because the system, as I mentioned by the data, was completely unsolved and problems will have to occur. And what's been occurring is that even when we have our own funds that we provide for government, I started paying government to have a 20 minimum wage retirement, and now I have a 5 minimum wage retirement. So you see how the reality of the government difficulties change, a system that tried to be very, very wide, but not very fair for the society.
Thank you for that. The other signal that I'm keen to explore, and I'd like to bring Catherine in to talk about this a little bit, is the thorny issue of retirement ages, and at what point should we set that? One of the big issues we've found in our research over the last 10 years is a lot of people have this expectation that they will retire at 65 because that's the age of entitlement. Obviously, if you move that back or if you abolish it completely, that would change people's expectations. Maybe even to Debra's point, it might address some of the age discrimination. So I'd be quite keen to get some sense from Catherine first, and then maybe Debra as to what should happen with retirement age and the shift towards flexible retirement. So Catherine first, if we could.
You make a really good point. One of the striking findings in our survey over the years relates to the retirement age, and what we see across the 15 countries, people's expectations about when they're going to retire are largely predicated on the retirement age in their country. But we do see some interesting trends emerging, and that is many workers around the world are looking to extend their working lives beyond retirement age because they either want or need the income, and for what we call healthy aging reasons. They want to stay active and involved and enjoy what they do. As we think about social security systems and sustainability and possible reforms, we did have some questions that delved into that topic, and very few workers indicated they're supportive of increasing the retirement age. And we also have to keep in mind that as policymakers are talking about increasing the retirement age, there are so many implications involved because the reality is we may want and intend to work longer, but as we get older, many people will be unable to work, and we need to have benefits in place to protect them if they're unable to work before their retirement age. So it's a really big issue and something that should become an even greater topic of conversation. We all have the potential of living longer than any other time in history. That implies spending more time in the workforce and longer retirements. And we've seen in the research an appetite for phased retirements so that work and retirement aren't an all or nothing proposition. But we've got a long way to go in terms of a public policy perspective, as well as employers having business practices in place to support these new realities.
Thank you, Catherine. And if I could invite Debra to make some comments on this point.
Sure, and I want to start actually by correcting you, because you started in the introduction saying that AARP stood American Association for Retirement, and we dropped that about 15 years ago because we realized that people as they age aren't all retired. Many people are working because they want to. A lot of people have to work longer because they need to. And we have seen retirement ages, the dates that people retire, increase across the US and many countries. I think at the OECD, the average retirement age has increased by nearly 3 years for women and a little over 2 years for men in the last decade. So significant amount of people working longer. But my problem with raising the retirement age is it's doesn't necessarily ensure people have jobs. So first of all, as I talked about age discriminations, people may want to work longer, but many people leave the labor force way sooner than they ever anticipated, either due to age discrimination, due to their health, or due to the need to care for somebody else. And so we can't just say everybody can work longer. I'll also make the point that there's a huge difference in life expectancy by income. Women at the top 1% live 10 years longer than women at the bottom 1% of income. 10 years longer of life. And so if we say everybody's living longer and everybody has to work longer, we're actually making a really, really regressive system out of our social insurance programs. There was a National Academy of Medicine report that came out several years ago that said because wealthy people live so many years longer, Social Security is no longer progressive. That higher income folks get more in lifetime benefits than lower income, even though the benefit formula. So I think these features of saying, which countries have done, is say the only way to deal with aging workforce is just raise the retirement age, misses the demand side, it misses the capacity of individuals, it misses discrimination, and it really misses the disparities between life expectancy by different categories of people.
Well, thank you for that. I think the other aspect, I guess, is you mentioned it in your opening comments, is the issue around understanding people's care needs in retirement, and that is something that we've also looked at. There's, I think it's becoming increasingly clear that because of the health aspects of aging, there are always going to be substantial numbers of people who can't continue to work, but will also need additional support when they do reach old age. Do you have any thoughts in terms of how we address that as a society and how we do a better job of it?
Lots of thoughts, probably take more than the end, because it's a huge issue that we work on it, and never more important right now than in COVID, where we're seeing people's families at home and small kids that they're taking care of and schooling, but also their parents and their grandparents that are living with them, and we're realizing that it's not just a multi-generational workforce, but it's often multi-generational households. And that provides different risks. We also have care systems that are woefully underfunded, underfinanced. Very few people have access or have bought long-term care insurance in the US. And as you've seen, we've had 50,000 deaths in nursing homes here because we haven't valued the need for care as people age. But back to my earlier point, and I think this is important too, you know, if you are an electrician and crawling around in attics to wire things, that's hard to do when you're 67. If you work any kind of physically demanding job, your body makes it hard to continue to work. And we don't have, as a society, a huge focus on reskilling, upskilling, allowing people to change jobs. I think that's an important role of the employer, but I also think that at a government level, we should be thinking about that. So Singapore, for example, has lifelong learning accounts for all of their citizens where they can continue to tap their accounts to train and skill throughout their lives, even into old age. And it could be just, you know, learning knitting. But we need to think differently about the fact that we have people living and being productive in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And we need to really review all of our society. And what I think is important about this report is really the push for employers to think differently. As I said, I think Luiz and I also think governments need to think differently. But as individuals, we need to plan for that second 50 of our life in a way that we really haven't historically because it's growing longer.
And I don't know who would like to pick up on this, though. We've had a question asking, given that the relationship between employers and employees is likely to change, more remote working, working from home, how do employers recreate that kind of support when the relationship is potentially going to fundamentally change, given the realities of life after COVID-19? Does anybody want to have a go at picking that one?
Well, maybe I can. Well, we have a very important experience in Brazil. We have changed at the university and at Mongeral Aegon. We have changed very quickly from on presential lessons or to work to online, and it's going very well. What we can feel and is that, you know, productivity has increased in the working place. At the university, at the schools, it's a little bit different because the contact is very important. But I think it's you know, this is a very important moment, as we don't know how long, you know, when we'll be able to return to some kind of normal life. I think that's a great opportunity, you know, that we have, and also a great opportunity for people to feel that it's very important that they have they prepare themselves better for retirement.
Thank you for that. I think we are now probably coming up towards the end of our time for the discussion session. So I'd like to introduce or ask all of you to just say a few concluding comments in terms of some of the themes we've discussed today and any takeaways that you would like to leave the audience with. So maybe, Catherine, I could start with you for some closing comments.
In closing, there are many things that employers can do to support their employees during their tenure when they're employed with them and beyond. And we've touched on some of them. I'll just do a quick recap. Offering retirement benefits and all of the services that come with them, ranging from investment guidance to financial planning services, offering other health and welfare benefits that can help workers protect their income in the event of a major financial setback. Employers can also offer workplace wellness programs to encourage their employees to stay healthy and promote lifelong learning, which we've spoken about. One last thing, for employers to think about, which I believe is particularly relevant right now during the pandemic, and that is flexible work arrangements. And for me, the offering of flexible work arrangements is a defining characteristic of an age-friendly employer. Workers of all ages from time to time have the need to balance their job responsibilities with other life priorities, from parenting and caregiving, all the way to those who are envisioning a phased or gradual transition into retirement. Flexible work arrangements can solve a lot of problems, and especially now during the pandemic. Deb touched on multi-generational households. There are people who are working from home, juggling homeschooling, taking care of their aging parents, and trying to get their jobs done. That's a really difficult proposition. And I realized that during the pandemic, many employers are navigating uncharted waters in terms of their work arrangements, but also keeping the ships headed in the right direction, facing really difficult business challenges. And it probably doesn't seem like the time to take on new initiatives. But I invite employers to think about this a little differently. Perhaps taking on or pursuing some of these solutions can help solve some of their shorter term goals, such as attracting and retaining talent, and fostering a diverse, inclusive workforce, and even optimizing their workforce management. So thank you for that question, Mark.
Thank you, Catherine. And maybe Debra, I could ask you the same question. Just some closing comments. Thank you.
You're muted, Debra.
Still muted. Should we try?
Well, maybe I can try.
How about this?
Make my, okay.
Okay.
No.
Sorry about that. My computer dropped me off the connection, so I lost you for a minute. And I know we're just about out of time, so I'll be really brief. I think what's important about this conversation is the fact that we're having it. So many people are in this situation of looking at longer lives, but so far as workplaces, as governments, and even as individuals, we've not done enough to prepare it. And so having a list of ideas of things that people should be working on is a really good first step, and then we need to do them. So we talked about lifelong learning, we talked about caregiving leave, we talked about age-blind hiring. All of those things are important first steps, but really embracing the needs of an aging society is something that is going to set companies and countries apart. The ones that do it will be successful, the ones that don't won't.
Excellent, thank you. That means that Luiz, Roberto, you have the final word.
Okay.
And if we could err on the side of brevity, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Well, working with education, I think that it's our experience, and in a developing country where education is very low in general, I think it's very important that we take the opportunity now, and this is being taken by Mongeral Aegon Institute of Longevity, and to prepare people better in financial education and wealthness. And we have some very important results that using online, using internet, we are being able to get to much more people and to give them better instructions on wealthness and on financial education. I think education is the main basis for a better future, especially in developing countries.
Excellent. Thank you for that summation, and thank you to all three of you again for the tour of all of the social partners in helping us to try to understand how it is we fix these problems and create a sustainable solution for the future. So thank you all. And at this stage, I'm going to hand back to Mike.
Thank you very much, Mark. And a very big thank you for a great discussion this afternoon, and to our three wonderful panelists, and for moderating a wonderful panel this afternoon, Mark. Just in closing, I wanted to maybe bring together some of the recommendations we have from our report. I think our speakers cover them in great detail, so I won't really go through them in detail at this point, but I think one thing I would like to say, and I think it's come together from our discussion today, is that it really does take cooperation and collaboration between various social partners, the traditional ones, employers, governments and individuals, but also new social partners, to find ways for us to create a sustainable retirement system going forward where nobody is left behind. So one last thing before we close off today, I would like to say that the website that Debra mentioned in her presentation is actually available. The link to it is available in the questions and answers if anybody would like to access it. If you have any questions about the content or would like to get in touch and learn more about our research or with the speakers, please feel free to get in touch with us through either one of the websites you can see here, or you can contact me directly through the invitation you received. But with that, I'd like to say thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for making an hour of your day to attend our discussion this afternoon. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye-bye. It was a pleasure.